So, an official welcome to this part of our special webinar series that we've been running the last couple of years. And this topic's on love and money and finding domestic money bliss. What a topic. We've got two fabulous women that I'll introduce you to shortly, sharing some of their insights and experience and expertise, which is really exciting. For those of you not so familiar with 10,000 Girl, we're a not-for-profit organisation aiming to improve the financial well-being of women across Australia. Our goal when we first started was to help 10,000 women with their finances, and we've surpassed that. So we just keep on keeping on. Our aim is to make finance social and fun. So it's really important today to recognise that what we're going to cover in this session is a small but very vital part of our bigger financial well-being picture. So we talk about 6 steps to financial well-being. The first one being the importance of setting clear life goals. And we're going to cover that a tiny bit today as well, or just recognise the importance of this, of being really clear on what are our personal goals and priorities, because only then can you flip that around and say, okay, well, what do I need to do financially to get there? Who do I need to have around me? And what conversations do I need to be having throughout my life to make my plans and goals happen? Step 2 is about taking control and laying really strong financial foundations. So, of course, the basics, knowing what money's coming in, what money's going out, what your assets and liabilities are, being comfortable with your debt situation, and doing some scenario planning at least annually, or definitely when your situation changes, whether it be marriage, divorce, babies, change of location. They're all great times to review your financial picture and make sure that you've got buffers and covers should anything go not to plan, as life does. So step 3 and 4 are about the investing principles. So really understanding some of the fundamentals behind why and when you would choose cash, shares or property as your different investment vehicles to reach your different goals. Step 5 is about thinking about the future and about your retirement savings, understanding and maximising superannuation, tax, especially the tax implications when investing, and a bit about estate planning. And all these things from step 1 to 5 are about proactively putting things in place. And then step 6, and this is what we're going to talk a bit about today, is about making sure that we're having really healthy money conversations with both our partners and our friends and family and advisors throughout our life, because 1, that keeps us accountable to our goals, but 2, we're often planning or finding ourselves planning our finances with other people, and it's really important to have these open money conversations and to have a bit of a healthy attitude about that. So that's what we're going to focus on today. Of course, we've all, met, fallen in love, moved in with a partner, perhaps, had a child or two, and all these experiences can be fabulous, but it also means, as I said before, learning to manage our money with people who often can have a different attitude to us. They've had different paths, experiences, and different grown up in different ways and managed money differently before you've come together. So whether you're the one that watches your pennies and your partner lives week by week or vice versa, often it comes into opening communication. So but in reality, opening communication can be harder than just saying, let's have a money conversation. And so today we're going to discuss a few things to help us all work towards what we are going to call today domestic money bliss. So we're going to talk a bit about understanding our own attitude to money and where our attitude has come from, and how that can impact, you know, when you start an intimate relationship, how to have the money conversations with your partners, and also why we don't, managing the money when one of you, likely being the women, are you know, have time out of the career workforce. We're going to touch on you know, having someone in the partnership having a gambling problem or other money issues, and some resources for that, where to get help if your relationship sours, and very important, we're going to share some resources also about, and all this is really about proactively doing things before crunch time. But of course, it's important also getting that guidance and advice, you know, when your settlement comes through, when after, you know, different separation events, etc. So we're just going to, before we start, do a little poll and get a sense of the crew in this webinar, and obviously this premise. Where do you sit? So when you're managing money with your partner, do you manage in a similar way? You know, are they at the whoops, I've got this wrong way. So are they the you know, spender, live in the moment, and you're the saver, planner? Or are you the spender, live in the moment, and they're the saver, planner? You're not sure, we don't talk about money, or is someone else influencing your money conversations? So sorry, I mixed that up. So we'll do number 2 as them, your partner being the spender, live in the moment, and number 3 being you're the spender, live in the moment, and vice versa. So votes are coming through. We'll just wait one more minute. We've got a bit of a spread so far. So everyone's coming from different angles, and this is really valuable and interesting to see as well, because obviously we'll close that and share the results. So this just shows how many sort of different money attitudes and scenarios there are, and how easy it is to you know, be in a relationship where you've come from quite different patterns. So a third of the group have said that that they manage money in a similar way to their partner. A third of the group are saying that their partner is like the spender and they're the saver. 10% say that they're the, well, you are the spender and your partner's the saver. And a third don't talk about money, which is, again, something that we're really going to focus on today, and because it's a very common thing. So I'm going to throw to, well, first of all, sorry, a couple more things. We're going to answer your questions along the way. So for those of you who aren't familiar with this webinar technology, you'll see in the control panel there's a question box. So if you can see the question box, just say hello or something. And through the webinar, please throw in any questions or anything you have, and we'll incorporate that into the conversation. We've got a question of the day that we're going to answer at the end of the webinar, and this question came through by email, and it's a fabulous and again common scenario. So we'll talk about that, but please ask questions along the way, and we'll make this as interactive as possible. Now, in this forum, 10,000 Girl, Nor, Virginia, and Jackie can give financial advice, and we really encourage you to obtain professional advice before making sort of major financial decisions. But we hope that this equips you with the confidence and the and the sort of empowerment and some good questions to ask, and so you can make the most when you do seek advice. Thank you to our generous partners who allow us to put this free webinars together. So Financial Literacy Australia, Rabobank, the Financial Planning Association, HESTA, which is an industry super fund, the ATO, Understand Insurance, which is the consumer site of the Insurance Council of Australia, and Credit Savvy, which you can get your credit score from that website. So all these partners have worked with us with this 2-year project, and we really appreciate their support. And there's also a wealth of information on all their websites. Now, really excited to have here today Jackie Wharton, Virginia Hare. I will throw it to you both to introduce yourselves, but I will premise it with the fact that you are exceptional women, and you have led inspiring lives, and now, you know, continuing through your work to inspire and empower huge amounts of people going through often difficult parts of their life. So thank you for the great work you do, and thank you for sharing your expertise. I'll throw it to you.
Thanks so much for that very generous welcome, Zoe. It's great to be here. This issue is very close to my heart. Separation and divorce advisors, I see women all the time who have found themselves in very difficult predicaments, given up work, and have financial issues when they come to looking to leave their relationship. I've been helping people through separation and divorce for about 8 or 9 years. I was a lawyer first at Mallisons, and then a negotiation advisor at Telstra, and then I went through my own divorce and realised that I wanted someone to help me a little bit more with some strategy and options and more practical support. So eventually founded this business, which really is a sort of like a divorce coaching or divorce project management service. But I really enjoy it. I really enjoy meeting women, and really once we've got a good financial separation for them, getting them on a good path to finding some financial independence and empowerment. So thanks very much, Zoe, for welcoming me today.
And hello, I'm Virginia Hare, and as I said, I run Strategy One Advice Network. You know, like Jackie, I guess I see a lot of young women who don't empower themselves early enough with money. So I think what you're doing here is fantastic, and girls should be more empowered around finances, because often when we see them later on down the track, it's a lot harder to help people when you're trying to get back stuff that, you know, we can't buy back our time. But like Jackie, whilst I've always been passionate about helping women, I became more so after I also went through my own divorce, and also found as the one who'd been the predominant breadwinner, who was the one who had accumulated most of the assets. I then found myself losing them. And I'm somebody who should have known better. So, you know, I'm very vocal about talking to women about that, and about protecting their assets, and about what they can do to set themselves up differently, because we always think it won't happen to us, but sadly, 1 out of 3,
yeah,
I think
1 out of 3
actually do. So, yeah, so that's just a little bit about me.
Well, thank you both, and well, we look forward to what you have to share with us.
Yeah, so I might just start off with this question and looking at talking about your attitudes towards money. And I think that's one of the things people really need to have a look at about themselves, and ask that question of themselves. Firstly, what is my own attitude to money? Why am I a saver, or why am I a spender? Because there's things in your life that have made you that way, and they go way back in your life before you even really understood it. So if you don't really have a good sense of yourself here, there's some really great research and some books that you can read on this topic, and I suggest you do, particularly if money is a problem for you. But a fabulous quote that I read yesterday was more around, if you're the person that's bringing debt into your relationship, be prepared to wear it, own it, and be proactive about sorting it out. And I think that's a really great quote, but it really goes back to what is your attitude to money, but then what is your partner's attitude to money? Because potentially that's not going to be one of the things that you can change. And if the fairy tale does go pear-shaped, sadly, and you had to rely on the aged pension, we put up that number for you to have a look at. And it's pretty frightening, you know, there are women out there right now having to live on that amount of money. Now, you know, we can do something different about that and make sure that you're not that person when it gets to the end of the day, to make sure that you've got a little bit more about that. But we talked about, you know, 40% of married couples have serious recurring arguments about money. You know, it's the number one conflict and reason for divorce. So I'll let Jackie talk a little bit more about that because that's what she sees.
Well, that's right. I mean, 30%, apparently you're 30% more likely to divorce if you fight about money more than once a week. So rather than once a month, for example. So I think we've all been there. I think we've all had conflict. You'll be bringing two people from often very different backgrounds together, and because we don't talk about money, it's one of those things that is sort of seen and not heard. Traditionally, I know myself that at the dinner table we didn't speak about money. It was not appropriate. We certainly never asked anyone what their income was, or I mean, we always knew that money was was a problem, but it wasn't something that was alive and something to be discussed. So it's not a surprise to me that people, when they start start an intimate relationship, it's not something that we think is polite to talk about. I think I read a stat a couple of weeks ago about, we're more likely to talk about STDs than we are to talk about attitudes towards money, which I find very frightening. And I think it's great that we're talking about STDs, but I think it's frightening that we're not talking about what it is, because it's basically fundamental. It's obviously, clearly from those stats, fundamental to the health of your relationship, but it's also fundamental to your own future. So one of the tips that I give, and Virginia, you might have other ones, but if you're thinking about talking to your partner about what their attitude is to money, obviously you can observe it to some degree, but you can have some fun with it. You know, you can talk about what you used to do with your Easter eggs. You know, were you a hoarder? Did you give them away? Did you eat them straight away? What did you do with your Easter eggs? Or if you won $100,000, or probably in this day and age, $1 million, what would you do? Let's start to have a conversation going about, you know, where you sit on the spectrum, because nothing's necessarily good or bad. It's just acknowledging it, isn't it? Really, as to where you're at. And once there's some acknowledgement of that, then the conversation about how that means that you deal with money in your relationship can flow a little bit more easily. So I think, we just put another stat up there, about 12% of households in Australia, single parent households with children, 1 in 4, living below the poverty line. And I think what a lot of people don't understand in divorce, and we're sort of I know that we're going to be harping on a little bit about that, but that's something that Virginia and I see all the time, obviously, is that all assets and debts in a relationship are split at the end of when you come to do your financial settlement. So it's not just what you both earned together, but it's what you both spent together. And more importantly, I think income isn't split. So whilst you might be supporting someone whilst they're getting their degree, or you're starting off, well, and all of a sudden your partner, traditionally your male partner may be doing fantastic things in their career while you're at home. That's not really going to help you a huge degree in the future, because his income isn't going to be yours anymore. So that's one of the reasons why I think women find it so difficult to recover from divorce, particularly if they've got children. And they also because the child support amount that you get these days is absolutely abysmal. So any reliance on that sort of income stream going forward isn't something that you'd want to be doing. Anyway, but there is good news. Yeah, I'll hand you over to Virginia for good news.
There certainly is good news. But I think some of the things that, Jackie talked about there, we're splitting debt. One of the things we see is that sometimes if you haven't had this money conversation and money is being hidden from each other, or debt is being run up by one person or another, and you know, we've touched on gambling in the beginning part, but it can be for a variety of reasons. It can just be because you've got a love of shoes or handbags, and as I said, it could be you that's running up the debt. It's really important that you have open dialogue about it, but that you also share your documents. And one of the things I'm really passionate about, and you know, I'm only talking to women here today, so it's you I'm going to say this to: keep all your documents, know where they are, have a place for everything. But even every year when you put your tax return together, you know where all your documents are. Check your insurances, check your superannuation. If you've got a will, and you should have one, check it. Make sure you're still happy that that's actually represents what you would want to happen if something happened to you. But have a file where you just keep all these documents. Also keep it electronically somewhere and in hard copy. But, you know, you should share that with your partner every year. That should be something that you guys sit down in July, August, whenever it is. And Jackie, I know, is really keen on it, but I am too. And that's when you sit down and you do a budget together. You sit down and you know, you've looked at each other's documents. That should be really open dialogue as to, you know, let me show you mine and you show me yours. Because then there's complete transparency. That should have your bank statements. It should have your credit card statements. You know, if everything is there, you know, you've got a really solid base to move forward from. And one of the things we always talk to people about with young couples when we're talking to them about saving for a house or, you know, a big purchase, is always about everything obviously going into one account and then paying each other out of that account a set amount of money that they've agreed on is the bit that they're going to live on. And I think that's a really good principle and a really healthy one going forward. I also do say to the couple that a woman will always need more than a man. Because
why would that be?
Just by the fact that it costs us more to get our hair done, it costs us more to get, you know, our dry cleaning done, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So I usually will say to a couple, you know, for him, sorry, you're just going to have to deal with this.
How does that go down? How does that go down with circulate?
Yeah, they usually kind of get it. They sort of shake their head, but they do understand that, you know, it does cost a little bit more for a woman. But I think that's and sitting down and redoing that budget every year is really helpful. And that comes down to that good news. Women really want to get involved in financial decision making, but you know, you've got to do it. And this comes back to that attitude I was talking about with money that's in your partner, that you might not know, it might not be your attitude to money, but it might be theirs. But if their experience has been, they've always seen dad in their household growing up control all the finances and mum had no idea, it might be natural for him just to assume that that's what you want too. And it might be natural for you sometimes to go, oh, I can't be bothered, I'll just let him do it. That's okay to a certain extent, but as I said, make it an annual thing that you sit down and you know everything, because Jackie and I, we could not tell you the amount of women who come to us later and say, I just didn't know. I didn't know what we had.
Sorry, Virginia, because I just think this is so important. A lot of women I speak to at workshops as well ask about, you know, they're sort of looking to leave relationships that have got a bit damaging or violent and stuff. And I think that what you're saying about from the very, very beginning, trying to have open conversations and know where documents are and stuff, because often relationships don't start abusive or violent or, you know, just, you know, they don't start uncomfortably, but they can build into that. And so if you, from the very beginning of any relationship, and of course, like anything, you hope it doesn't sour, but the more proactive you can be with being aware of where documentation is and having open conversations, the earlier you're going to pick up, you know, if there is a little bit of financial abuse or secrecy or something going on as well, and so you can be really proactive in that space as well.
Yeah, and this should be a habit, by the way, and if there are any mothers on the line, I started this with my children the minute they get their first job. I give them a folder and I say, this is where you're going to keep all your really important documents from now on. And my sons too. So, you know, when they've got that, because again, when it does go pear-shaped and we're trying to help somebody or somebody's thinking about leaving, quite often then they don't know where to find things. They don't know where to find important documents. They don't remember. And that's one of the other things. Anything you ever sign, ever, you put in that folder.
Once you've read it.
Most
you've read the document.
But if you sign something, and so often we see and hear women who sign documents and sign guarantors, but they can't tell us what they've signed. They can't tell us where it is or what it was for or what it was about. You know, that folder should just be your go-to file. But from experience, I'm just going to give you a little tip here. Somebody recently who I recommended get a binding financial agreement many years ago because she was going into a relationship that I personally felt wasn't right for her, but that's okay. She did it. And that's all right too, because we all make mistakes. And she did what I asked her to do, and she got a binding financial agreement drawn up. She had the money, not him. She's since had a child. She's been out of the workforce, etc., etc. The relationship has soured. She went back to her lawyer for the binding financial agreement because she couldn't find a copy. The lawyer has lost it. So, you know, don't think these things won't happen. So, firstly, the lawyer can only give her the draft that she had of it. She doesn't have a signed copy, so it means nothing. So this woman is now staring down the barrel of very expensive legal to prove that this was actually signed. He's claiming, of course, he didn't sign it. So I can't stress to you strongly enough that if you get into that habit, and as I said, I use tax return as a good example because it really is when you should sit down and go, what did I spend this year? And as a habit, reset your budget for the next year. But even if you're not going to be that anal and you're not going to set budgets and all that kind of stuff, just when you put your tax stuff together, if I can implore you, if you take nothing else from this webinar but to put those documents together and keep them somewhere, that would be great.
And sorry, Zoe?
No, I just said great tip.
Yeah, no, it is. It's absolutely, and it's, you know, I see women all the time who've got, and men obviously, but mostly women who don't know key facts that are crucial to any financial settlement when it comes to divorce. And a lot of people don't realise this, but when your assets and debts are important and start accruing together when you move in together. So when a court would be looking at splitting your assets and debts later on in the event that it doesn't go well, and by the way, we do believe in marriage, and we do believe in love. So we're not entirely cynical, but we also believe in women being prepared at all costs. So back to what I was saying, when a court looks at splitting up your assets and debts later on, they're going to take, as I said before, all assets and debts that are current between you. So whether they're in your name or his name or jointly, they're all included to be split. But what they do is they look back and they say, what did you both bring in when you moved in together? Not when you got married, but when you moved in together. And this is why I think it's so important before you move in together for you both to sit down and come up with a list of all your assets and debts at that time, so that you really have a good understanding of what you're getting into, and also for you to be transparent about your own debts and whatever else, and own them, because you can then later on go back to that email or that piece of paper or whatever and say, look, this is what we had in the beginning. And I can tell you now, people spend hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to work out what they had in the beginning of their relationship. And if you can prove that, that this is what we both agreed that we had at the time, that's going to save you a lot of heartbreak later on. But it's also the beginning of a good conversation, because, this is what we've got. How do we want to move forward? Where do we want to be spending our money, and how does that all look? So, sitting down at the beginning and it doesn't have to be a serious conversation. No. And I think that's what happens. I think people think, it's really scary to talk about this. But, I think if you have started yourself, as you were saying, being accountable to yourself with your documents and doing your tax returns and being upfront to yourself about where you're at, then it's just a very casual conversation to be having, because it's an expectation. You should have an expectation that these things are going to be talked about.
I would also be very nervous, and you would have to ask yourself the question, if you feel nervous about having that conversation, why?
Yeah.
Is it you? that's feeling nervous about it, or is it something about, you know, his attitude to money that's making you feel nervous? But don't ignore it. Don't ignore your gut instinct on that. You know, is it just your background? Is it just because you never heard your parents talk about money that you feel uncomfortable with it? But figure it out. Figure out why you're feeling uncomfortable, and hopefully, but have that conversation, as Jackie said. Put in those important documents, just a where are we now, a statement of position for when you relationship. It may save you later on down the track.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a list of questions though that I can send to you. Sorry. Sorry, I was just saying I've got a list of questions that I can give to you that that I use with people. Actually, it's more when they're thinking about doing binding financial agreements, or they're more commonly known as prenups. When you're starting to have that conversation, because obviously that is probably a more formal conversation. It's not as casual as you sitting down and working out your budgets together and working out your money values. These are more, you know, if we're going to come to a formal arrangement, what is that arrangement going to look like? But some of the questions are, you know, did your parents fight about money? Did they use money to control each other or you? We have people who've got parents that seem to use money to control actions. Did someone use money to show love, or, you know, is money something that's about security, or is it about prestige? So I've got quite a few questions I can give to you if you want to put up on your webpage.
Yeah, that's great, Jackie. And I love what you said also about the other conversation starters, you know, starting not necessarily with your money situation, but saying, well, what would we do if we, you know, won $1 million, or what did you do with your Easter eggs, or, you know, starting in a neutral territory.
Yeah, because I think, and I think I'm just going back to that stat that we put up there about, I think it's 75% of men saying that they wish that, of affluent men, wishing that their partners were a little bit more active. And I have to say that I often sit across from men who talk to me about the burden of being, if not the primary breadwinner, certainly the person who is in control of the finances and the investments, and or the spending. And they honestly feel like it is a huge burden, and it wears away at them because they do not feel equal, and they know that their partners aren't feeling equal, and it is a source of massive conflict. And when they say they want them to be more involved as well, you know, that might mean just saying, yep, well, I'll come to the accountant with you together, or I'll go and you know, if you're going to see the financial plan, let's go and see them together, or, you know, tell me about our finances. You can start those. I mean, it's never too late to start the conversation, because on the other hand, I see women who say that men are very controlling with the money, and I take your point, Zoe, about financial bullying and financial abuse, and that is something that the family law court takes very seriously, and I mean, we all do. And you're right, it starts off, I think it probably starts off small, that someone takes more control than the other, and then there's the conversations aren't really had, and decisions are made, and assumptions are made as well, that, you know, that one person is more in charge than the other person starts to feel more intimidated and unequal, and that's not healthy. And eventually, it turns into more financial, what we would say would be financial control or financial abuse or bullying, which is not obviously, which is domestic violence, basically. So if you can start on the right foot, and if you're not getting the right reaction from the person, your loved one, then, you know, do what you can to change that. But have a big think about what that means, because, you know, if you're starting off when you're, you know, you don't have children together and you don't have much savings, how are things going to change when you take some time off?
If you're fighting about money now.
Yeah, if you're fighting about money, then when there is more stress when you have children, how's that going to go? And
There's a question that's come in that I might read out, and you can either, because it's a bit of a segue from what you're speaking about now, or if you want to leave it to the end, that's fine. But I'll just share it with you. Would that be okay?
Sure.
So someone said, when there is control and power issues in a relationship and the woman is planning to exit the relationship, what should she do before starting the ball rolling with the partner? E.g., mortgage is in both their names. She bought the family home with an inheritance, as well as paying off his credit card, but his salary pays for the mortgage and the car, etc. He's threatening to stop paying if she ends the relationship. He spends a lot of money on alcohol. There are 2 young children. She feels stuck and completely dependent on him for everything. Where can she go for help?
I might start with that and see. I'm sure Virginia's got some other insights, but
and we can also send through some other resources as well. So just answer as best you can. Group environment.
Absolutely. So with that, obviously, in terms of preparation, the best thing that you can really do is, first of all, get your documents sorted if you're still in the house, and I can talk to that in a minute. But get your documents sorted as much as clearly you can. Take copies of everything that's important, and I'm not just talking about current assets, but anything that shows what's happened over time. So,
old bank statements,
old
tax
bank
returns,
statements, old
everything you can get your
sale documents, registration, anything that has some sort of dollar figure to it is useful. If you've still got access to the bank accounts, then I would definitely be taking the last 3 years, copies of what's been going on, or documents. If it gets to divorce or separation and you go to see lawyers, then each of you will be required to give financial disclosure, which means showing the last 3 years of your personal credit cards and bank account details to each other, as well as income tax returns and whatever else. But for the first instance, I'd definitely be looking at that. I'd be checking to see whether, if you've got a mortgage on your house, whether you've got a redraw facility. And if you do have a redraw facility, then I would be, well, it's an interesting one, the redraw facility, because you may need, as a woman at home, if you've got one, you may need access to that cash. And I know that may mean throwing a grenade if you take that money, but sometimes you may have no choice. So it's really important that you understand how much you have in that redraw facility or any other loans or credit cards, because we want to know how far you're exposed. And it might be that you have joint signatures, but just be aware that sometimes even the joint signatures, you can still withdraw it over the internet. And I had a client yesterday who did exactly that because her ex had left her with 2 small children. She's at home, not working. He's refusing to pay anything at all. There was $120,000 in the redraw, and we basically redrew that and sent him a very nice email saying, we've just done this because you have refused to pay these things, including the mortgage, but we don't want to spend it. So please let's come to some sort of agreement about what's going to be done. And it's amazing how a withdrawal of a redraw can get the other person to the table to start talking. So you bought the family home with your inheritance, which means I'm not sure whether that was prior to your relationship starting or during, but in any case, inheritance would be considered something that was special to you, that you brought to the relationship. So you will get some credit for that inheritance. It may not be the exact dollar figure, but it will be something. In terms of the fact that he's paying the salary with his mortgage, and look, you know, everything is sort of put into the pool. It doesn't really matter whether he's been paying the mortgage with his salary, because you presumably have been at home looking after the children. And it's really important to understand that, you know, a court will recognise that. They recognise all non-financial contributions to a relationship, so that should be okay. That will, if he will probably be saying, well, that's my money and I've used it to pay for the family home, the mortgage, but you should be aware that the court's not the way. If he's got alcohol issues, there's obviously parenting issues, which I won't go into, but you probably would be best to, if there's wastage and if there's alcohol issues, you need to be alert to other issues such as gambling. So yes, again, any record of alcohol consumption or spending and gambling is something you definitely need to look at. And other than that, I'd just be getting prepared in terms of getting your budget ready. I wouldn't be moving out of the house. He may say that he's going to stop paying the mortgage, but if he stops paying the mortgage and the mortgage isn't paid, it's going to come back on him in terms of his credit rating. So that's a threat that's often made, but is not often. I don't know, have you seen it? I mean, in my experience, it hasn't often. I don't think I've ever seen someone stop paying the mortgage. I mean, they've wanted to not pay the mortgage, and have been forced to a sale. But yeah.
I have to say I have seen it in one instance where somebody did stop paying the mortgage, and in this instance, and this is another reason, the woman was not living in the house. She'd left the house, so she was not receiving the documentation from the bank showing that it was in arrears. So she was under the impression that because he was living in the house, she'd left it with the children for safety issues, that he would be paying the mortgage. Because she left him and he couldn't control her any longer, he then decided that he wouldn't pay the mortgage. She didn't find out about it until the bank was prepared to starting to take court action.
Oh, dear.
So it's one of those things, if you move out of the house, or even if you don't get a copy of that statement, if your relationship becomes volatile at any time and there's that threat, make sure you're opening that credit card, that loan statement every month, or get the bank to send you a copy of it, or check it online. Don't assume that the mortgage is just getting paid because you haven't heard. Because like we know, even though in this instance 2 people were on the loan, they weren't notifying the other person, even though they were sending the documentation to the house.
I mean, that's not unusual, to be honest. They tend to just send it, particularly if there's a personal banker involved, they just send it to I hate to say this, to the bloke, or the primary breadwinner. But, generally speaking, or the person that has the relationship.
So make sure you change your address details if you do move out, if you feel you have to. But, that's just a really important tip too, to always be across that mortgage document and knowing that those loan payments are being made.
Yeah, I don't know whether I've answered that adequately, Zoe, but definitely get across all your financials, start putting an asset and debt spreadsheet together. Superannuation is often something that people forget to include, and it is useful, even if it's not something that you necessarily want now, as a negotiation point. So superannuation is really anything that you can find on that is perfect.
And as for where does she go for help, Jackie? Where would you?
Well,
what would your starting point be?
Well, the point it depends on how far the issues have gone, and obviously I would always recommend people seek marriage counselling, because the worst financial decision anyone could ever make is divorce. I think we all know that. But having said that, if things aren't going well, then you need to get legal advice fairly quickly. And you can come and talk to me, and we can refer you on if we can't help you, but or go and see. A lot of lawyers will give you free advice or a reduced fee for the first hour. Shop around on those lawyers. Be careful. I like real estate agents, and if you're going to go in there with knowing what your balance sheet is. Go in there knowing what your budget is. Go in there knowing your history, your financial history, because then you'll be making much more use of your time with the lawyer. And because lawyers aren't, they're not cheap.
No.
I think the average lawyer will charge around $500, $550 plus GST an hour. The good ones a bit more. So go definitely talk to someone. If talking to someone doesn't mean that you are ending your marriage or that you're going to be responsible for it, it is being responsible for you and your children. And it also sometimes gives you a bit of freedom to then concentrate on your marriage, because you understand where you sit on this side of the fence, and now you can go to the other side of the fence and work on that a bit more.
And maybe this gives you a goal to work towards, maybe instead.
Yeah.
Also, the Money Smart website have just launched a new divorce and separation financial.
We both violently recommend that site. It's our go-to site for all of our clients. both Jackie's and mine, so
Yep.
both on financial and others. It's got, if you haven't actually spent any time on this site, again, one of the tips you take out of today, go and spend an hour in your lunch hour next week and just work on this site. Look at things like the calculator. Look at the difference you could make to your retirement if you actually just were adding a little bit of extra. $83 a month is what I like to see people add from a very young age into superannuation. So there's all those sort of calculators that can help you, but as you're pulling up there to Zoe, there is also everything on domestic violence and financial abuse.
Correct.
It's really good stuff.
Actually, I just saw the tip up there, which I should have said, and one that I always give people is to get your own credit card while you're still in the marriage, because you may find that more difficult later on if you haven't got your own income, and that will be useful.
Good tip.
Thank you. No, it's honestly, it does. I have seen too many people not being able to get a credit card. Which means
there's also a new this asset calculator is new as well if you need a little bit of guidance.
It's got everything you could want on this website to play around with.
Yeah, and really it's just owning it, as we've said, owning it, and getting. I can't tell you how important it is just to be prepared for all contingencies. I mean, obviously don't keep all those documents at home, put them in a safe place, or give them to a trusted friend or a post office box. But if you can collect them all, you will feel better for it. I think a lot of the times people don't want to do it because they're scared, and fearful, and it's absolutely fair enough. But once you do it, you do start to feel better and feel more empowered. Yep.
Hence our little girl with a sword there. She's feeling very empowered.
Yeah. That's right.
But so I think we've pretty much covered that slide too, as we've talked. But it is just own your financial security. Don't give that to anybody else. Just own your documents, own your own position. You might not always have control over everything in your life, but at least if you can control some of your outcomes when it comes to money.
And be aware.
And be aware.
Yep.
And you start that early, you'll be in a better position than if you don't start.
Correct.
Yeah, great. There's another good question that's come through. For a financially independent woman embarking on joint finances in a new relationship, what's the best piece of advice you'd give?
Well, it would definitely be to sit down and share those documents. If you're going to sit down with somebody, if you're going to embark on that sort of relationship together, and I don't know what that means, so whether it means moving in together, buying a house together, because that's sort of different from, we're kind of just going to see how it goes. But I think certainly when it gets to that point where it's serious and you're going to actually start being responsible for each other's debts and assets, because that's effectively when it gets to that point. And it's very hard for you to sit down and say to him, oh, by the way, I want to know your financial position if you don't know your own.
Or if you're not willing to share your own
right.
too. And that's where it gets to, is that in your values to share and be transparent about, is it something that was talked about? And if it isn't, why not? And if you're financially independent, congratulations, it's awesome. And you should be proud of that. And that's obviously important to you. You should be, put yourself in a position whereby you're going to be able to continue to do that. And that's really about talking to your partner about it.
And if you actually then, as you've been a financially independent woman and you've met somebody, a financial advisor is a great person to start together with then too, and that is something I'd probably recommend, because they'll sit down and look at the big picture. They'll look at your insurances, they'll look at your savings, they'll look at your income, they'll look at where, you can gain any tax advantages. So if you're not already seeing a financial advisor, I would probably do that together as well, and sort of, start your relationship that way, in a really strong fashion, so that you're both, because that financial advisor too, if they're good, should actually sit down with you and work on your goals. They should be asking you, okay, where are you now? Where do you want to be in 3 years' time? And where do you want to be in 10 years' time? And when you sit down and have that conversation with your new partner, and as I said, with a mediator in the room or a financial advisor, whatever you want to call them, what you're going to very clearly see on the board in front of you, if that's how they work, and I know that's how we work, is firstly what does 3 years look like for us, and what does 10 years look like for us. So if the relationship's developed enough, I would highly recommend that too, so that you both know where you're heading.
Great.
Yep. So we can probably flip that one.
We've talked about,
Yeah, we've covered a lot of that.
Yeah.
This one for me, this is my number one thing I say to young girls, and I just say it all the time: know your numbers. I can't tell you often enough how many girls can't tell me what's in their superannuation. They can't even tell me how many funds they have, and they should only ever have one. I don't care what fund it is, just have one. But know your numbers. You know, your superannuation can be your biggest asset quite often for these young girls, and it can make such a difference in the end to how you spend your retirement years, your ability to be able to travel, your ability to be able to do things for your family. You know, and getting this right early, and the earlier the better, but know your numbers. It blows my mind how many people can't tell me how much their mortgage is, how much their mortgage repayments are a month. You know, don't be that woman ever. Be the woman who knows your numbers. Be across it. Don't be naive to that sort of stuff. Don't think you don't need to know. Yeah, you do. And you might not need to know to the cent.
Although Virginia would like you to.
Yeah, I would, but I'm okay with it being, you know, at the end of last financial year it was worth X. But knowing your numbers is power. You know, it just means you're not oblivious to what is going on around you, even if you do take a secondary role in the financial affairs. But as a woman, know your own stuff. You know what interest rate you're paying on your mortgage. Be happy to pick up the phone and say, I'm not happy with that rate, you know, do me a better deal. Know what rate you're getting on your superannuation fund, you know how much some financial advisor may be taking out of your fund in fees. Know that stuff, you know, don't just go through life thinking those things don't matter. They actually really matter.
They all accumulate.
And know your numbers.
And it's also because if you're across all that stuff, then your partner will know you're across that stuff, and it's going to be less likely that he thinks that he's going to be able to control you financially or hide things from you, you know. So, and I know, look, I have to admit that when I was always the person in charge of the money until I had children, and then I dropped the ball completely, and that was not a good idea at all, and I was distracted. So another piece of advice I would give is, if you're not earning anything, you should at least know everything, because that way, as I said, things are more equal in the household, and that's always a good thing, a little bit of equality when it comes to finances. But also you're in a much better position if anything starts to go wrong, or if things start to go right. You have a say and feel like you've got some voice in the decisions that are going to be made. Don't be that woman that doesn't go to those meetings. Because, again, you're reinforcing that burden on your partner, and you are putting yourself in a more vulnerable position.
Yeah, and back to the question earlier from the lady who's financially independent, you know, if you do that once a year with your financial planner, you know, so even if you lose sight of it and you have kids and other things happen, if you make it a rule that once a year you go to your financial planner, you sit down again, you reassess those goals, you relook at your numbers, you know, you put it all up on a screen together, then you're always going to have that knowledge, you know, and just enforce some habits in your life that even when things, you know, as I said, you might stop work or other things might happen. If this just becomes habit regardless, don't let it drop off because you've had a baby. You know, just keep those habits up. They only have to be once a year.
Yeah, and make sure you know things like who is your nominated beneficiary on your paper.
Absolutely.
I've seen that not work out well for couples.
And just a little tip on that, by the way, understanding that super doesn't form part of your will. So understand that, you know, people should know that and actually understand what that means. And if you don't know, you should talk to your advisor or you should find that out. So
from your super fund. All right. Well, we talked about that there is a wealth of information around. Pardon?
That site's fabulous. Cannot recommend it highly enough.
She's going to say it again.
And so, Virginia, you also mentioned a couple of books and resources, and Jackie, you mentioned a couple of questions when you're doing agreements, when you're starting a relationship. If you're happy to share those, and when we share the recording, we might share a few links to some
Yep, we do
resources
that.
and to
Yep.
your guys' websites, that would be really great. Again, thank you to our really generous partners for allowing us to run all these programs for free. But thank you, Jackie and Virginia, a huge amount. And I just thought there might be a couple more questions that come in, but in the last 5 minutes or so, we might cover the question that was the question of the day that was emailed in.
Yep. That Jackie will go to that.
So I've sort of talked to some of that, but the main points in here. First of all, we've been living in the property together for 2 years. So traditionally, 2 years is the beginning of your de facto relationship for the purposes of family law. However, it isn't as straight as just a 2-year rule. You know, there are other factors that go in that come into account. So, for example, if you have children, or if you're really mixing your funds, or if you're investing money together,
or you were living together 5 years prior to that, but not in that property.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So 2 years, yes, is a sort of rule of thumb for de facto, but don't ever think that it's just 2 years flat. It can be earlier. And I might actually just add a little bit at the end of this, Zoe, on prenups. So here we're saying that your family members suggested buying property in a trust, but sounded complicated, and it is complicated. But if the relationship does end, the family court does have the power to go back and have a look at that trust and to see why it was started, and they may very well have the power to put it aside on the basis that you were trying to get around the family law provisions. So what I'm saying is that the family law, a de facto relationship starts for the purpose of family law. That means that that act actually comes into play, and therefore there will be some division of some sort under the Family Law Act between you two and on your assets and debt. So it won't just be your mortgage, it will be everything else. You say that he pays rent to you and you split some of the bills. That's important because if you've got a short relationship, which is under 5 years from cohabitation, the court tends to want to keep things as they were prior to the relationship commencing. Now, again, if there's other things like children have been born in that time, or there's been such a merging of finances, they may be less inclined to do that. But generally, they'll want to just to say what you brought in, you leave with. So if it's getting close to 5 years and you're thinking seriously about the relationship being finished, then I would go and get some legal advice. Even though the mortgage is completely in your name and he didn't contribute to the deposit, he will be entitled, that property will still be going into your pool to split. I'm not saying that he'll get 50% of it. It might be that you get, you might get 70% or more, depending on your circumstances, but it will be considered part of the pool if it's past 5 years. If it's prior to 5 years, then it might be that the increase in the value of the property may be something that needs to be split between you. So yes, if if it's getting quite close to a relationship breakdown, or you're considering it, then I would definitely go and get some legal advice on whether or not leaving or the relationship finishing before 5 years. Sorry, not that I'm encouraging for the relationship to be over, but if that's important to you and it seems to be, then you should be aware of your rights. Exactly.
Yeah.
So I might just talk a little bit about prenups.
Yeah, great. And then if Virginia, you have a final tip as well, that's fantastic.
So in Australia now, prenups, or they're actually called binding financial agreements, are legal documents that you can enter into. The important thing is to note, though, that it's not just you and he sitting down and drafting a piece of paper and both signing it. You both need to get separate legal advice as to the terms of the agreement. I wouldn't necessarily, depending on how many assets you have and whatever else, it's not necessarily a usual thing that people in their first marriage or relationship sign a prenup. That doesn't mean you can't have a conversation that would be similar to a prenup conversation, but normally it's a second marriage where there are children involved, where people enter into it. But just so that you know, it is something that can be enforced. If he is asking you to sign a prenup, well, then you should know that you should get good legal advice and don't go to his lawyer. I have heard of that happening, even though that's not meant to happen, and they go and give the advice and then they push you off to someone else that's a friend of theirs and they just sign it off. Go and get your own, and have that conversation early. Do not have it a month before the wedding. And if he wants to have it a month before the wedding, think about whether you want to postpone the wedding, to be honest, because you should not be forced into it, and people do feel forced into it because of the timing and all the expense. Yeah, I'll leave it to Virginia to give her final thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's a tough conversation, that prenup one, but then having conversations about money is tough. So it is certainly something, though, that, my final tip of the day is have it. You're going to be better off for having had the conversation than not having had it. But if you feel like you need somebody to help you have those conversations, because, again, a good financial planner who, if you sat down with one who can see that in a new relationship you've come in with all the assets, should probably be the one that might recommend that you enter into a binding financial agreement. But, as a woman, protect what you've built. Don't let anybody take that away from you. It might mean you have to share it with somebody else who contributed along the way. But, get all the advice you can from the right people. And all the little tips I've given you today, I will put them up on the site for you too. But, if you do those things that we've said today and you just make them a habit, I hope that your relationships are all happy and healthy and you don't have to go through any hardships, and that would be wonderful. That would be the best thing that could ever happen. But it will be a lot more likely to happen if you've had really good, healthy conversations about money. Because you'll know what your goals are, you'll know, and you'll be together, you'll be aiming for those things. Now, by the way, as I said, we do believe in love, and I have found the man in my life that we have all these conversations and we're on the same page and we're aligned, but it didn't happen initially, and I wish that somebody had told me all these things because I've learnt all of it the hard way. And again, I should have known better. So if you're sitting there feeling like, oh, it's too late, or I wish I'd done this earlier, it's never too late. Just do it. Do what you do what you got to do, and be happy and have a happy and healthy relationship.
What a great note to end on. Thank you both so much for your generosity in sharing, your own tales and stories and experiences, with all the people that you have helped along the way. Thank you for everyone who participated live, who asked questions, who is taking proactive steps in their life, because it really benefits everyone, every proactive step and proactive conversation you make. So thank you and kudos to you. In the next 48 hours or so, we'll have the recording and some resources up on the website, and so feel free to revisit, or those of you listening to the recording, enjoy and make sure you explore, spend some time exploring all the different resources, as it will lay you in good stead in the future. So thank you again very much, Jackie and Virginia, and I'm sure we will be in touch, and some other people from the participants will also be in touch with you, because obviously you provide a very valuable service. So have a great week, everyone.
Thank you. You too. Thanks, Zoe.